There is a war happening inside you right now. You might not call it that. You might call it procrastination or bad luck or just the way you are. But it is a war, and the most devastating thing about it is not how long it has been going on. It is who the enemy is. You are fighting yourself. The version of you that wants to grow, and the version of you that quietly destroys every attempt at growth, the part that starts and the part that stops, the voice that says go and the louder voice that says who do you think you are. Both of those are you. And until you understand how that happened, until you understand the exact psychological and neurological mechanics of the war inside you, you will keep fighting without ever knowing what you are actually fighting against. This audiobook is about that war, not the comfortable version of it, not the version where you get a list of habits and feel better for a week, the real version, the one that requires you to look at yourself with a level of honesty that most people spend their entire lives carefully, deliberately avoiding. Because here is the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Most people will lose this war, not because they are weak, not because they are less capable than the people who win it, but because they never understood the terrain. They fought without a map. They kept attacking symptoms while the root cause stayed untouched, fed by everything they refused to examine. This is your map. Stay with me, because what you are about to understand will not just change how you think, it will change how you see every version of yourself that came before this moment. Part 1. The enemy in the mirror. Let us begin with a question that sounds simple and is not. Why do you keep doing things that hurt you? Not the obvious things, not the reckless decisions or the clear mistakes you can point to afterward and understand, the subtle ones, the pattern of almost making it and then stopping. The relationship that was going well until you, inexplicably, almost against your own will, said or did the thing that broke it. The business you were building that stalled the moment it got close to real. The body you were transforming that you then, quietly, methodically, started undoing at the exact moment results began to show. Psychologists have a term for this, self-sabotage, but the term itself is almost too clean, too clinical for what it actually is, because self-sabotage is not a quirk or a bad habit. It is a deeply sophisticated defense mechanism, and like all defense mechanisms, it is trying to protect you from something your conscious mind does not even fully recognize as a threat. Here is what the research tells us. The human brain has two primary operating systems running simultaneously. The first is the conscious mind, the one reading these words, the one with goals and intentions and plans and dreams, the one that decided to press play on this. It is analytical, rational, forward-thinking. It wants things. The second is the subconscious, and this is the one that runs the show. The subconscious processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind processes roughly 40. The subconscious governs your automatic behaviors, your emotional reactions, your deep-seated sense of what is normal and what is possible and what is safe, and it is almost entirely governed not by logic but by pattern. Patterns built in childhood, patterns reinforced by repetition, patterns shaped by fear and love and loss and the thousand small moments that taught you who you are and what you deserve and how much is allowed for someone like you. When your conscious goals conflict with your subconscious programming, when what you want runs directly against what your deepest wiring says is safe or deserved or possible, the subconscious wins, almost every time, not because it is stronger in the way a muscle is stronger, but because it is faster and older, and it has been running its program since before you were old enough to question it. This is why willpower is such an inadequate tool for genuine change. Willpower is a conscious resource, finite, depleted by decision fatigue, by stress, by hunger, by the accumulated weight of simply being alive in a demanding world. And you are trying to use that finite conscious resource to override a subconscious program that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without ever needing rest. You are bringing a candle to a wildfire and wondering why the fire keeps winning. Understanding this, really understanding it, not as an idea but as a felt truth about how you operate, is the beginning of everything, because the moment you stop blaming yourself for failing to muscle through your subconscious programming by sheer force of will, you can start asking the only question that actually matters. What is the program? Part 2. The voice that sounds like you. There is a voice in your head, you know the one. It is the voice that narrates your failures in real time, the one that says you looked stupid back there, or that person could tell you didn't know what you were talking about, or of course, that happened, it always happens to you. It is the voice that preemptively edits your ambitions. That takes an idea before it is even fully formed and immediately begins the process of dismantling it. Too risky, too unrealistic, too much for someone like you. Psychologists call it the inner critic, but that name makes it sound like a minor annoyance, an internal editor with unreasonable standards. What it actually is, what the research shows with increasing clarity, is something far more complex, far more powerful, and far more consequential than a voice with a bad attitude. The inner critic is the internalized voice of your most formative experiences. It is the voice of a parent who expected perfection, a teacher who made an example of your failure in front of others, a peer group that told you through cruelty or through silence that you did not fully belong, a culture that measured your worth in things you could not control. Over time, through repetition and emotional reinforcement, those external voices became internal. They moved inside, and at some point, so gradually you never noticed the transition, they started sounding exactly like your own thought. This is the insidious genius of the inner critic. It does not arrive in someone else's voice. It does not announce itself as a foreign installation. It sounds like your most honest, most clear-eyed assessment of reality. It sounds like self-awareness, like being a realist, like the part of you that keeps the more delusional, more hopeful parts in check. But it is not honesty. It is history, wearing the mask of honesty. There is a branch of psychology called internal family systems, developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, that offers one of the most useful frameworks for understanding the inner critic. The core idea is this: the psyche is not a single unified entity. It is a system of parts, each with its own perspective, its own emotional history, its own role to play. And the inner critic is a part, a specific part, that took on the job of criticizing you before the outside world could. If I tear myself down first, the thinking goes at some deep neural level, then no one else's tearing will catch me off guard. If I remind myself of my inadequacy constantly, I will never be blindsided by someone else pointing it out. The preemptive strike, the internal bully hired as a bodyguard. This reframe changes everything, because instead of experiencing the inner critic as the truth about you, you can begin to see it as a part of you, a frightened, well-intentioned, deeply misguided part that is trying to protect you using tools it learned in a context that no longer exists. The critic learned its craft in an environment where being wrong was dangerous, where standing out attracted punishment, where hope without caution led to pain, and so it became vigilant, it became relentless. It became, over time, the most consistently active voice in your internal landscape, because it was the one doing what felt like the most critical job. But you are not in that environment anymore. The classroom is gone. The household is gone. The peer group that shaped your early sense of self is gone. And yet the critic remains, still running its old operating system, still firing its old alarm signals, still treating every moment of vulnerability as a genuine threat to survival. The work is not to silence the critic. You cannot silence it, and trying to through suppression, through aggressive positive self-talk that refuses to acknowledge its existence, only drives it underground where it operates without your awareness at all. The work is to recognize the voice, to hear it and know what it is, to say, I see you, I know where you came from, I understand you are trying to protect me, and I no longer need this kind of protection. I am choosing something different now. That conversation, that internal shift from identification to witnessing, is not a one-time event. It is a daily, sometimes hourly practice, and it is one of the most profound acts of courage available to human being. Part 3. The Ego's Secret Agenda. Now we need to talk about something that will feel counterintuitive, possibly even offensive, because it challenges one of the most fundamental things most people believe about themselves. Part of you does not want to grow. Not the part you consciously identify with, not the part that set goals and bought the book and started the program. That part genuinely wants change, but there is another part, the ego in its psychological sense, not the colloquial sense of arrogance, that has a secret agenda that runs directly counter to growth. And until you understand what that agenda is and why it exists, you will keep running into it as an invisible wall. In psychology, the ego is not about pride. It is the psychological structure that maintains your sense of a continuous, stable self. Its primary function is coherence, the feeling that you are the same person today that you were yesterday, that your understanding of yourself and the world holds together in a consistent story. The ego is the story keeper, the author of your personal narrative, and it is extraordinarily protective of that narrative because a coherent self-story is not just comforting. It is, at the level of the nervous system, a survival resource. Consider what it actually means to grow, to change a fundamental belief about yourself or the world, to become someone who operates differently, who sees differently, who relates to themselves and others in a genuinely transformed way. What that requires at the psychological level is a revision of the story. And a revision of the story means, for a period, living in the space between who you were and who you are becoming, a transitional space, where the old identity no longer fits and the new one is not yet solid. And the ego experiences that space as annihilation. This is not metaphor. This is neurological. When your sense of self is threatened, when your self-concept is destabilized, when you are asked to revise a story you have been living inside, the same neural alarm systems that respond to physical threat are activated. The amygdala fires, cortisol floods. The nervous system moves into a defensive state, not because you are in physical danger, but because your brain does not distinguish between a threat to your body and a threat to your identity. This is why genuine change is so viscerally uncomfortable, not just psychologically. Physically, the anxiety before the difficult conversation, the tightening in the chest before stepping into the unknown, the nausea of doing the thing you have been avoiding. These are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are the ego's alarm system doing exactly what it was built to do, trying to pull you back to the known self, the story it knows how to tell, the version of you it knows how to maintain. Here is what this means practically. Every time you approach a genuine threshold, every time you get close to doing the thing that would actually change you, you will feel resistance, not random resistance, not weakness, precise, targeted resistance calibrated to the exact point where the change would take. The resistance is the proof that you are at the right door. Most people feel the resistance and interpret it as a sign to stop. The people who chain, the ones who break through, learn to read that resistance differently. They feel it and recognize it as the signal that they are close, that the thing they are about to do matters, that the discomfort is not danger. It is the feeling of the old story getting ready to crack. The ego does not have to be defeated. It has to be reassured. The way you reassure it is through consistent small action. Every time you do the uncomfortable thing and survive. Every time you revise the story in a small way and discover that you are still here, still intact. Still you give your nervous system evidence that the transition is survivable. You teach the alarm system that this particular door is not a cliff edge. And slowly, with enough evidence, the resistance changes, not disappears, changes. It becomes lighter, more like a gentle habit of caution than an emergency alarm, and you learn to walk through it anyway. Part 4. The comfort zone is a lie. The phrase comfort zone has been so thoroughly co-opted by motivational culture that it has almost lost its meaning. Step outside your comfort zone. Growth begins at the edge of your comfort zone. We have heard it so many times it has become noise, but underneath the cliche is a neurological truth that is worth understanding properly, because it changes not just what you try to do, but how you try to do it. The comfort zone is not simply the place where things are easy. Neurologically, it is the range of experience your nervous system has learned to regulate, the range within which your body knows how to maintain homeostasis, how to keep cortisol, adrenaline, and the nervous system generally in a manageable state. Within the comfort zone, you know how you feel. You know how to handle what arises. The brain's prediction systems, its constant, automatic modeling of what will happen next, operate with relative confidence. Outside the comfort zone, all of that changes. The prediction systems become uncertain. And the brain, as we have established, does not like uncertainty. What it does in response is increase alertness, increase vigilance, increase the activation of the stress response, because in the world this brain evolved in, unpredictability was dangerous. The unknown deserved caution. Hypervigilance outside the familiar was a survival advantage. And so when you step outside your comfort zone, when you genuinely do, not in the metaphorical Instagram sense but in the real nervous system sense, it feels bad. Not just mentally, it feels bad in your body. Tight, exposed, slightly wrong, the way a dislocated joint feels wrong. Some deep physiological signal saying this is not where you are supposed to be. This is the lie. Not that growth happens outside the comfort zone, that part is true. The lie is that it is supposed to feel comfortable. One of the most damaging ideas in modern self-help culture is the suggestion that if you are doing the right things, growth should feel natural, aligned, easy even once you find your purpose. This is a beautiful idea and it is factually wrong. Real growth involves real discomfort. Not as a side effect to be minimized, but as a fundamental, unavoidable feature of the process. You are literally asking your nervous system to expand its regulatory capacity. You are asking your brain to build new prediction models. You are asking your identity to revise its story. None of those things are supposed to feel easy. The discomfort is the process. The research on this is unambiguous. Studies on performance and skill acquisition consistently show that the most productive zone for learning, what psychologists Yerkes and Dodson mapped over a century ago, is not the comfort zone, but it is also not maximum stress. It is what researchers call the optimal challenge zone, a band of experience that is difficult enough to require adaptation, but not so overwhelming that the system shuts down into pure survival mode, stretched, not snapped. This matters enormously for how you approach change, because most people either stay fully in the comfort zone, never stretching at all, managing their discomfort by not approaching the edges, or they try to make massive, dramatic leaps that flood their nervous system and trigger exactly the kind of survival shutdown that makes lasting change impossible. The dramatic leap feels like commitment. It looks like courage from the outside, but a nervous system in full alarm state cannot learn, cannot build new pathways, cannot revise its story. It can only try to get back to safety as fast as possible. The alternative is unglamorous. It is incremental, consistent, deliberately uncomfortable, but not overwhelming, a daily practice of choosing the slightly harder option, the conversation you have been avoiding, the step you have been postponing, the version of yourself you have been preparing to become for so long that the preparation itself has become the comfort zone. Stop preparing. Start the uncomfortable, incremental, unglamorous work, because the comfort zone does not get smaller when you avoid it. Every time you retreat from the edge moves inward. Every time you choose the avoidance, the nervous system learns that thing is too dangerous to approach, and the boundary tightens, and the life gets smaller, not dramatically, slowly, in ways you can explain away for years before you one day look up and realize how little of your actual self is being used. But the inverse is also true. Every time you approach the edge and stay there, even briefly, even imperfectly, the nervous system learns, I survived that. That was manageable. The boundary expands. The life gets larger, not all at once, slowly, in ways that compound over time into something that looks from the outside like transformation, but is, from the inside, just the accumulated evidence of 1,000 small choices to stay at the edge one moment longer than last time. Part 5. How to win the war. We have been building to this, and I want to give you something real, not inspiration that fades. By tomorrow morning, a process, 4 stages, each one building on the one before it, each one grounded in what psychology and neuroscience actually show about how human beings change. Not how we wish they did, but how they actually do. The first stage is radical honesty. Not the curated kind, not the kind you perform on social media or in therapy sessions, where you are still managing the impression you are making, the kind you have alone when no one is watching, about exactly where your life is and what is actually driving the patterns you keep running. This requires sitting with questions that are uncomfortable enough that your mind will try every available distraction to avoid answering them directly. Where am I self-sabotaging, and what am I protecting myself from by doing it? What do I actually believe? Not what I say I believe, not what I want to believe, but what my behavior over the last year reveals that I believe about my own worth, my own capability, and what is possible for me. Whose voice is my inner critic? Where did it come from, and what was I trying to survive when I first let it in? Write it down, all of it, not in a cleaned-up journal entry, in raw, unedited truth, because the act of externalizing thought, of moving it from the internal monologue to something outside yourself that you can look at, creates psychological distance, and distance is the beginning of perspective. The second stage is compassionate accountability. This is where most approaches to personal growth get it wrong, in one of 2 opposite directions. The first direction is pure self-criticism. I know what I need to do and I just keep failing to do it, which means there is something fundamentally wrong with me. This approach fuels shame, and shame, the research of Dr. Breen Brown and others has shown, is not a motivator, it is a paralyzer. Shame tells you that you are the problem, not the patterns, not the programming, not the coping strategies of a frightened, younger version of yourself that are still running on autopilot. And when you are the problem, the solution is to become a different person, which your ego immediately and correctly identifies as a threat to its survival. The second wrong direction is pure self-compassion without accountability, the therapeutic culture version, where everything is understandable and nothing is your responsibility because of what you went through. This is also not it, because without accountability, the compassion becomes permission, and permission becomes stagnation. Wearing the mask of self-acceptance. Compassionate accountability holds both. It says, this pattern makes complete sense. Given where it came from, I understand the frightened version of me that built this. I have genuine compassion for that version, and I am an adult now. I have resources and awareness. That younger version did not. I am responsible for what I do from here, not because I deserved what shaped me, but because I am the only one who can change what it built. The third stage is deliberate microaction. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic reinvention, the smallest possible version of the thing you are avoiding, the single email instead of the full business plan, the one conversation instead of the entire relationship overhaul, the 10 minutes instead of the hour, the microaction that is small enough that your nervous system does not need to raise the alarm, but real enough to begin generating new evidence. The reason microaction is so powerful is this: your nervous system changes through experience, not intention. You cannot think your way to a new comfort zone. You cannot visualize your way to a new self-concept. Those things are tools, useful ones, but they require action to become real, because the moment you act differently from how the old pattern dictates, you are creating new data, new experience, new evidence for a different story about who you are and what you are capable of. Every microaction that goes well is a small neurological vote for a new identity. And you do not need a majority overnight. You need consistency. Day after day, the small votes accumulating into something that starts to feel less like effort and more like nature, less like going against the grain and more like the grain itself shifting. The fourth stage is building a new internal narrative. Remember, the ego maintains coherence through story, so if you want the ego to stop defending the old self-concept, you need to give it a new one to protect, not a fantasy, not a vision board of an unrecognizable life, a revised story about who you are, one that is slightly more expansive, slightly more accurate, slightly more honest about what the evidence actually shows than the one you have been living inside. This revised story is not built through affirmations. It is built through accurate self-witnessing, the daily practice of noticing not just what went wrong but what went right. Not just where you fell back into the old pattern but where you caught it, where you chose differently, where you were even briefly, even imperfectly, the person you are trying to become. The brain has a negativity bias. It notices and retains negative experiences at a rate roughly 3 to 5 times that of positive ones. This is not a flaw, it is a survival feature, but it means that if you are not actively, deliberately counterbalancing it, you are building a biased record of your own life, a record that confirms the old story. Accurate self-witnessing is the act of making sure the full truth, not just the parts the survival brain notices by default, gets into the record. Over time, these 4 stages compound. The radical honesty reveals the patterns. The compassionate accountability gives you the psychological stance from which to address them, without shame shutting you down. The deliberate microaction generates the new evidence, and the new narrative builds the story that your ego can actually learn to protect, a story that is true and that serves you, and that keeps expanding in the direction of who you are actually capable of being. The closing. The war inside you is not new. It has been going on for as long as you can remember, probably longer, between the person you are and the person you are afraid of not being good enough to become, between the voice that says move and the voice that says, but what if you fail, between the self that wants and the self that quietly, methodically protects you from the risk of wanting. You now know where that war comes from, not from weakness, not from some fundamental deficiency in who you are, from an extraordinarily sophisticated system of protection that was built in circumstances that no longer exist, running programming that was never meant to be permanent, protecting a version of you that deserved protection and no longer needs it the way it did. You know about the subconscious program that runs faster and deeper than any act of willpower can reach. You know about the inner critic, where it came from, what job it thinks it is doing, why arguing with it directly never works. You know about the ego's secret agenda, and why approaching genuine change activates the same alarm systems as physical threat. You know about the comfort zone, not as a cliche but as a neurological reality, and what it actually costs you every time you let its boundary tighten. And you have a process: radical honesty, compassionate accountability, deliberate micro-action, a new internal narrative built on accurate self-witnessing, not a quick fix, not revolution by Tuesday, a practice, a long, patient, sometimes frustrating, ultimately transformative practice of choosing yourself one small decision at a time. Here is the last thing I want to leave you with, and it is the thing that I think matters most. The fact that you are still fighting means the war is not over, which means it is not too late. Surrendered to the old story. Do not sit with material that challenges it, the part of you that is still reaching, still looking for the map, still refusing to accept that the cage is the whole story. That part is the most important part of you. It is the part that has been surviving everything. The inner critic, the ego's resistance, and the comfort zone's tightening have thrown at it for years, maybe decades. That part deserves to win. Not someday, not once the conditions are perfect, not when you feel ready, because readiness is not a feeling that arrives before the action. Readiness is what you feel on the other side of the action you were not sure you could take. The war does not end in a single moment. It ends in 1,000 moments, each one smaller than you thought a turning point was supposed to be, each one saying, not today. The old story does not get today. I am choosing the other thing, again, still, always. Begin. The person you are fighting to become has been waiting long enough.